Behold this week's bounty of the Luxa, Prime Speaker Vannifar, as a glorious Brawl commander. This commander allows you to play Birthing Pod as your commander, which is both as broken and actually as fun and actually relatively balanced as it sounds, because she's a creature. Birthing Pod never had to have summoning sickness, whereas Vannifar does, and of course Vannifar is vulnerable to creature removal. In exchange, you have her as your commander, so you don't even need to draw into your Birthing Pod. For those unfamiliar, Birthing Pod was pretty powerful when it was in Standard, and although this is a weaker version in a lot of ways, there are a few ways in which it is more powerful, so we'll play around with it. Basically, this deck is going to be structured as a ramp into beatdown deck with a lot of tempo along the way. A really interesting blend of strategies that's also got a toolbox theme throughout. Brawl is really well suited to these toolbox themes because you can only play one of a card anyway, and you're limited to the standard format, which is going to have cards that are good at hosing certain types of strategies. And Vannifar is perfect for this because you can just go get the card you need. She's also ideal for a digital game because one of the worst things about Birthing Pod was always that you had to shuffle virtually every single turn, making your games take forever, and it's also just annoying to shuffle every turn. Whereas on Arena, you could just boop, and like magic, the card flies out of your deck and you don't even have to worry about shuffling. So it's a great fit in a lot of ways, and I hope that you very much enjoy it. Let's go over the options that you have at each part of the curve, because of course there are a lot. Well, for most converted mana costs, but at 1 we really only have a couple. Arboreal Grazer is exactly the card you want in this deck though. It gives you value from an Enter the Battlefield effect, and then you can pot it out with Vannifar's ability to a 2-drop. Perfect. Not exciting, but perfect. We want as many cards that let us play Vannifar before turn 4 as possible. Gilded Goose is also pretty obvious, mostly a glorified Birds of Paradise. We do also have Oko and Wicked Wolf in this deck, which gives it a little bit of synergy here and there. But another interesting interaction is that Vannifar can pod out a token. Tokens have a converted mana cost of 0 after all, and then you can fetch Goose. So you can do this if you're taking too much damage, or maybe your opponent has some burn or some inevitability of some kind. I can think of a few things that people are playing in Brawl that are like that, and you can use that to survive, which is excellent. A little utility. Moving on to 2-drops, we have Fibblethip, who draws you a lot of cards. You'll draw 2 cards if you use Vannifar to fetch him, since he will have entered from your library. If you just play him by himself, he's a 2-mana 1/1 that replaces himself, and you can trade him up to a 3-drop, which is also totally fine in this deck. Now we have a lot of mana dorks, because we want a lot of mana dorks. Because we are singleton, we have fairly limited options, but luckily most of the mana dorks in Standard are actually pretty good. So Incubation Druid gives us a mana sink, that's excellent. Leafkin Druid often taps for 2. Paradise Druid protects itself until we need it and fixes colors. And then we have Maraleaf Pixie, not so great because although it fixes colors, you need both colors to get it, but this also has flying, something not much of our deck has. Growth Spiral isn't a creature, so it's not as ideal, but again, it's another way to get to Vannifar before turn 4, and we can cast it as an instant, which has synergies here and there, like with Nightpack Ambusher. And we also have Arcane Signet. Remember to go craft this. It's only 1 common wildcard, and you won't get it from packs. It's not in packs. But again, another way to get you to Vannifar before turn 4. Although this is one of the weaker ones, the only real strength is that it color fixes, and colors are not something we have much of a problem with here. The other cards we have in the 2-mana slot are mostly to help with Vannifar's weaknesses. So we have Wildborn Preserver. Might seem like a bit of an odd addition because it's not beneficial to use Vannifar to pod up to or through. But the reason this is good is that Vannifar decks and Birthing Pod decks before them often suffer from the problem that they're stuck with one threat. They're upgrading something through their curve, and then that one threat is very vulnerable to spot removal. You can upgrade and get value as you go, and sure, you did get all those Enter the Battlefield effects, but if that threat is killed, you don't have much board presence. So Wildborn Preserver allows you to build another threat, and you can very easily activate its ability because creatures will be entering the battlefield constantly, and almost none of them are humans. In fact, are any of them human? Anyway. So it's very, very easy to activate, and you can sink all your mana into the ability to make a second or, third or whatever huge threat, which is valuable. Crashing Drawbridge is also pretty sick tech. This will give Vannifar haste, so you can play it and then tap it when it untaps the turn you play Vannifar, and give her haste, and then use her haste to activate her ability, trade out the Drawbridge for a 3-drop, which is quite elegant. This can also occasionally be used to give big things haste in the late game, which is, occasionally valuable, just the side effect. Of course, this card is mildly useful without that synergy. We also have a couple of spells that are interesting, very few of course because of this type of deck. Neoform is basically a Vannifar activation on a spell, and it also comes with the ability to give us a 1/1 counter. Do note that for things like Gargos, Vicious Watcher, when we get to him, the sacrificing the creature part is part of the cost of the spell, so if something would trigger when it's targeted by a spell, it will be dead before the trigger goes off, so you can't use this to trigger Gargos' ability. But it's still pretty good. Again, you can use this to both double up on Vannifar or surprise your opponent who had killed Vannifar and thought that you would not be able to upgrade stuff, but then suddenly you still can do so once. Finale of Devastation plays a similar role, of course getting you an extra body. There are a few parts of this deck that are interested in going wide, so this is valuable. It's also another way to tutor for Goose if you need the life or various other things. And it can also be an overrun effect if you get a lot of mana. 12 mana sounds like a lot, but we have Nissa and the Great Henge as well as a lot of mana dorks, so it is actually possible to use this as an overrun and a source of haste as well. Moving on to 3, we have Brazen Borrower. Not something you're going to be potting into, usually going to be used for petty theft to get some tempo. Vannifar is a relatively questionable tempo play at first, because you do have to pay 4 mana and then usually not immediately get an effect, which does lose you a little tempo, so going into that 4 mana play with some tempo from petty theft is pretty good. You can bounce other people's commanders, you can just bounce things that are not working, you can bounce tokens, but it is useful to get a little bit of tempo. You wouldn't want too much, but then this also becomes a body that you can trade out for a 4-drop, so it's a pretty good fit. Again, being that this is standard, and standard is the smallest that it's ever going to be because we just had things rotate out, it's also the case that we are going to have to play some cards that are just strong cards in Simic colors. Ferocious Pup, on the other hand, is exactly what we want. Creature that gives us its value from an Enters the Battlefield effect, and then pieces out for a 4-drop. Risen Reef is the exact same way. These are part of 2 little tribal synergy packages. We even have kind of a third with Gargos and the 2 Hydras, which I'll come back to later. We have a little elemental synergy package and a little wolf synergy package around the 3 to 5 drops. So this is part of that. And again, this can get you a land. Unfortunately, it can't get you to Vannifar faster because you'll already be on 3. But if you don't have the 4th land, it could get you it. And it's still just a very good card. We still have big, expensive things. Kiora also doesn't accelerate you, but she can untap Vannifar to double up on potting, so you could get 3 activations with Neoform, which is pretty spicy, and you can do it a lot of times, and she also gives you some card draw. There are a couple of card advantages engines in here just in case you are running out of gas, or you have an opponent that is also playing a very powerful, value-laden strategy. I'm not even going to talk about Oko, literally the least interesting card to discuss in this deck. There's virtually no synergy on this card. It is just a very, very good Simic card. Also, we'll see how this video ages if this card gets banned, because it totally should. And honestly, you could probably play this exact same deck with Oko as the commander, and it would be better because this card is completely busted in Brawl, but I just said I wasn't going to talk about him, so there you go. Spark Double. This allows you to also double up on Vannifar by copying her, because it makes the copy non-legendary. You can use this to double Nissa, you can double a lot of things. Double Oko. But again, overall, this is valuable. It will trigger Enters the Battlefield effects as well, which is excellent, because it is entering the battlefield as the copy. So there are a whole lot of options. And this is a very, very good pick for this deck overall. We also have Nightpack Ambusher. This is a weirder one because it's encouraging you not to cast spells, but there are a lot of things in this deck that you can either play with flash or at instant speed, or that you can use as mana sinks. We have a couple lands that are good mana sinks, and a couple abilities on creatures that are good mana sinks. This is also a lord for your wolves, and because Vannifar's ability is swapping out bodies anyway, you can actually do a lot with your turn, even if you don't have any flash or mana sink, because you can still pod something out, and then you're still getting a wolf, and it gives you a lot of board presence. This is just a very, very powerful card. Wicked Wolf, again, probably doesn't need much of an introduction, can be boosted by Nightpack Ambusher, can be boosted by like Neoform or something. It's very, very nice with Vannifar to have it be that you get to a point at the top of your curve where swapping out basically anything gives you access to basically anything. You want access to removal and board presence and all sorts of stuff, and this gives you a way to fight stuff, which is good. At 5, we have the 2 Cavaliers. Cavalier of Gales, of course, synergizes with Risen Reef, but it also has its own synergy with itself. This card is strongest when you can use its Leaves the Battlefield, its Dies ability, to shuffle away the cards you put back on top of your library with its Enters the Battlefield ability, and Vannifar is a very, very good way to do that. You can either hard cast the card and swap it out, or be swapping through it twice with Kiora or Neoform, and then it will shuffle away its own cards that you put back on top, which allows you to basically just draw 3 cards, and then you don't have to redraw the cards you put back on. You even get to dig a little further with Scry. So again, it's a 5/5 threat, but mostly it's just very good card selection in a context where it's likely to die soon after it entered the battlefield, for benefit. God Eternal Ronus is spicy here as a way to double the power of stuff. This is kind of an overrun effect. It does give things vigilance, so you can even attack with Vannifar and then still use her ability, which is rather helpful, and you get your mana dorks, you can attack with them and then still use them for mana. And then, of course, it puts itself back into your library third from the top when it dies, which is valuable because later in the game you want to make sure you're drawing large threats that you can upgrade to larger parts of your curve. Cavalier Thorns, no specific synergy here, just a very good card. Nissa, again, very little specific synergy here. There's just a lot of mana sinks, and it's very good with the Hydra package, but this card is also just so strong that there isn't a lot of sense in not playing it. Again, we're playing in Simic colors, what are you going to do? Then we have Dream Eater. Most of these top curve things are just obvious choices. This bounces something and does a lot of card fixing. It's also a big flying threat. It also has Flash with Nightpack Ambusher. Gargos synergizes with the 2 Hydras. We have Voracious Hydra and Hydrid Krasis. This allows you to get 4 more in their X count for free, and also gives you fight power. If your opponent is fighting over the board, trying to kill Vannifar or whatever, this doesn't protect her so much as kill their stuff as well. And it's an 8/8/7 with Vigilance. It usually doesn't matter that it's only an 8/7. So it's a big body, which is important. Agent of Treachery, again, super obvious. You steal anything. Meteor Golem is kind of just the worst version of this. This is normally an interesting card because it kind of color pie bends. It lets you destroy permanents that you normally couldn't in different colors. But it's still good enough. I still think that when you get to 7 mana, you want the option to just answer anything, so it's still valuable. Thorn Mammoth lets everything fight stuff. This is a lot like the deal with Wildborn Preserver, where when anything enters the battlefield, you get to fight. You can make things enter the battlefield very, very frequently with this deck, so it's rather valuable. And then, of course, at the top of the curve, at 8, we have End Raise Forerunners. If you're swapping stuff out all the way to 8, you don't need more stuff to swap into. This is an overrun effect. This is the only true overrun effect that gives Trample in the deck, and it also gives Vigilance, which is nice. This is a good card. And then we have the Great Henge. This is a powerful card in most beatdown-based decks that are playing larger creatures. It's not totally ideal because the majority of this deck is actually rather small creatures. It's just that we have access to the bigger ones relatively easily. Gaining life is something this deck wants to do, and having a draw engine is also very valuable. It's not usually relevant, but you can also animate this with Oko. Again, you're usually doing that to like Signet or maybe Crashy Drawbridge or something, which is fine. But it is the case that you can, in a pinch, make this into a body. Generally, this is a way to gain life. Mana Base doesn't have a lot of interesting stuff. Vantress acts as just a good card, but also as a card selection engine, and a way to spend your mana if you're using a Nightpack Ambusher. Garenbrig is a ramp card, there you go. Gingerbread Cabin, I don't think that Mystic Sanctuary, which is the blue version of this that lets you return an instant or sorcery, I don't think it's good enough. I think you won't often have 3 or more other islands to activate it, and there are also very few spells in this deck, whereas for this card I think there are just enough, and the detriment if you don't have it untapped is like just not bad enough, and you do want the food. There's so few sources of food, so I do think it's valuable. Then we pretty much just have all the lands that are relevant to our colors. I do think you should run pretty much all the color fixing you have access to. So we have Breeding Pool, of course, an actually good one. Temple of Mystery, actually a good one. Thornwood Falls, it's pretty borderline. And then Simic Guildgate is usually pretty bad. We just have very limited options for things that can fix our colors, so I do think you want them. There are some gnarly mana costs in here, like, you know, some questionable ones. So I do think it's important. Command Tower, don't remember to craft this. Remember, it's just a common. Then we have Evolving Wilds and Fabled Passage to finish it up. You shouldn't feel like you need to craft a rare Fabled Passage if you don't want to use it, but remember, you can put it in basically all your Brawl decks. So there it is. Pretty spicy, if I do say so myself. It is a really, really fun way to enjoy Brawl. Take advantage of the format's restrictions. You want a toolbox anyway, and this makes you use one. And there's just a lot of strong cards in these colors. I also think, like, for a lot of people, they're playing Oko because Oko is overpowered, and Oko will probably be banned in Brawl, let's be honest. So when he is, you can play this, and it'll be great fun. Again, one of my favorite things about this deck is that I love this type of effect, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense in paper because you have to shuffle so often. Like, it's good if you're in a competition, you should play it, but like, it's just a displeasure to need to shuffle every single turn, possibly more than every single turn. So it's really, really nice to have a situation where it just happens for you. A deck that would normally have its only drawback being that it's laborious to play, totally removed. So I hope you enjoyed this very much. We have videos every week about glorious bounties of the Luxa River, and I hope you enjoy the next one. Thanks for watching.